If you break down this high quality motion design animation, you'll notice it's composed of 3 advanced scenes. Scene 1, a hyper-realistic sci-fi animation with layered visual effects. Scene 2, a minimal solar system with 3D spheres and planet motion. And Scene 3, a circular graph pop-up with a clean interactive slider animation. And in this After Effects Masterclass, I'm going to teach you how to build out all 3 scenes completely from scratch. If you stick around until the end, you won't just watch this animation, you'll know how to recreate it and add it into your editing arsenal. And speaking of which, if you're a video editor who wants to master creating motion design like this, learn 300 plus more animations, and use these skills to make money with video editing, that is exactly why we built Ultimate Editors. It's a full 90-day plan to help you become a high-level editor, and it's all gonna be linked down below. And with this all being said, let's jump right into scene 1, the hyper-realistic sci-fi animation. The first thing I'm going to go ahead and add is a nice and simple background. I'm going to right click and add in a new solid layer, and I'm simply going to add the 4 color gradient on it. Then I'm just going to put these points in the corners, and to make a very quick background, I'm just going to make one of these colors a dark black and use the eyedropper tool to make all of them black. Now I'm just going to take the color in the top right, which is going to be color 2, and select it and make it a lighter gray. And I'm going to take the color in the bottom left, which is color 3, and select it and make it a slightly bluish gray. And this should give us a nice and simple background. Now obviously the big thing in this whole animation is going to be that ball. So let's go ahead and get to work on the first animation, which is the light sweep revealing it. So to create this, first we need to create our ball. We're going to right click and we're going to add in a new shape layer. Then using our circle mask, we're going to hold down shift and draw out a simple circle in the middle. I'm just going to go ahead and use the align functions to set this thing in the middle. I'm also going to use the easy tools plugin to set the anchor point in the center. The next big thing I want to do is I want to make sure that this thing is just a flat color. So I'm going to use my fill to select a regular color. And since the first scene is going to be revealing it with the light sweep, I first need to create the light sweep animation. Now to do this, all I have to do is set the fill color to black. First of all, make sure there's no stroke on it. And then I'm going to add the effect called CC light sweep. Now this light sweep effect is what we're going to use to create the rays. So I'm going to take this center and just make sure it's at the middle of the screen. I'm going to give it a nice simple orientation, something like this. And the first thing I'm going to do is obviously remove my sweep intensity. I don't want a sweep, I just want the edge that the light sweep gives me. So for this first one, I'm going to use 150. Second thing I want to do is remove the edge thickness down to 3 and increase the edge intensity up to 75. This is going to give us a nice and intense edge. Now here's what I want to do. I want to animate this light sweep actually revealing the circle. So what I'm going to do is select my shape layer, take my light sweep center and keyframe it in the beginning. And I'm going to just make sure that my light sweep center starts off over here in the bottom left where it's not visible. Now I'm going to move around 2 seconds forward and I'm just going to move this thing to the top right just like so. So we're just going to select both of these, bring them into the speed graph. Just make sure that it starts relatively fast and ends slow. We don't want it to be too intense, but I think this is a pretty clean animation to make. Now you might be wondering, well, how is this even useful? Well, the main way that this is going to be useful is if we select this shape layer, click on toggle switches and modes, set the blending mode to screen, all of a sudden we can no longer see the black values and we can only see the light sweep on it. Now we could basically select this light sweep, go to effects and presets and add a deep glow to the light sweep. So for our first light sweep effect, we're going to select the color and I'm mainly going to be going with a light blue theme. So for the first sweep, we're just going to go with a very light blue color. And right around here, I'm basically going to select my light sweep effect and I'm just going to click on Control D, which is going to duplicate my effect. Now keep in mind guys, I still have the same keyframes on my second effect, but what I can now do is change the orientation and now my light sweep will be facing the bottom and I'm going to have it basically be in the opposite direction of the light sweep up top. This is basically going to start my light sweep here and give me a nice cool animation like this. Now I'm going to go to the last keyframe over here, just making sure that both of these light sweeps are in the beginning not visible. So I'm going to move them off like that and also at the end not visible at all. Now we don't want them both to be the same, so I'm going to go to my second light sweep here. I'm going to tweak a few things. The big thing that I'm going to do is decrease the width to around half. So we're going to go with 75 and just leave the edge intensity at something around 65. And the other thing I'm also going to do is use a different color. Since we're using light blue for the first one, I can either go with a darker blue for the second one just to kind of give it a bit more of an edge, or I could go with a complete white for the second one and just kind of fully blend it in. I'm probably going to end up going with something like a slightly darker blue just so that we can make sure that this thing really stands out. There we go. I think that looks amazing. I like this very quick reveal animation in the beginning, but we can add an extra layer. What I'm going to be doing is selecting my shape layer and clicking on Control D to duplicate the entire layer. Now this is going to give us a duplicate of this layer, but I don't necessarily want that. What I'm going to do with my second layer is I'm simply going to be adding the CC radial fast blur effect. Now when you do this, what it essentially does is by increasing the amount over here, it creates this kind of casted zoom in, especially when we set the zoom to brightest. And the beautiful thing about this is since it's also only on the screen values, it's only going to appear as the light sweeps come through. Now a few things to note, I do think this is too strong, number one, and number two, way too bright. So first of all, let's put this shape layer under our light sweep. And the second thing we can also do is we could play around with a few settings. Like the deep glow, we could tone down the intensity to around half. For the colors, we could pretty much leave them the exact same. That's totally fine. But I do think the edges are a bit too sharp, so we could just go ahead and add in the Gaussian blur effect onto this layer. And by simply increasing it, we can soften up this whole effect and make it look really, really foggy, which is an effect that I really, really like, to be honest. Now, the problem with increasing the blur is we also get the blur around these edges here. So what I'm going to do is we can actually just tone it down up until it's not that intense and it's just enough to kind of blend it in together. Final piece of detail, we're just going to tone down the opacity until it's not too strong, something like 50%. And there we go, guys. We have the light sweep reveal animation. Now, as this light sweep reveals, I also want it, and this is going to sound crazy, I want it to feel like it's dynamic, and I want to add this kind of foggy texture to this light sweep reveal. This is just going to add a bit more realism to it. The first thing I'm going to do is create a texture map. To do this, I'm going to right click and add in a new solid layer. On this solid layer, I'm going to add in my fractal noise effect. Now, the fractal noise effect is going to kind of behave as my smoke map. You don't need to know too much about this, but we're just going to change the fractal type to something like smeary. And the main way that we're going to be using this is we're going to go ahead and basically use our track matte to track matte this to the layer which holds our light sweep effects. And when we do this, it's only going to appear with the CC radial fast blur. Now we need to change a few things. The first thing is we need to click on this to invert it so that it only appears in the light values. And you guys can already see this is what it looks like. I can put this under our light sweep as well. This really doesn't look good. So how do we bring this to life? I think I'm going to play around with the brightness and contrast until I get a less of a foggy effect. Maybe something like this looks good. And I'm also going to bring it to life by going all the way back and keyframing my current evolution, going forward and just simply adding maybe 1 or 2 rotations based on how intense I want this animation to be. But one thing I don't like is the fact that this fractal noise layer is so white, it's kind of whitening our animation even more. So to change this, we're going to be adding in the tint effect onto our fractal noise effect. We're going to leave the black values as black. We're going to map the white values to this lighter blue color, which is going to create a blue fog. So once we get to this point over here where all the light sweeps are basically finished, we can just go ahead and transition into the next scene where we're going to have this chrome reveal of the ball. And I want to make these overlap. So let's go ahead and work on the chrome reveal animation. The first thing I'm going to do is go over to my 2-second mark after all these animations are done. And since all the layers disappear, I'm just going to select all of them and go ahead and Control-Shift-D and cut them off right here. All right, so to first work on the chrome ball reveal animation, we're going to need to use the same exact circle layer as here. So what I'm basically going to do is take any of these shape layers and Control-D to duplicate it. Bring it up to the top. I'm just going to place it after the 2-second mark here. Now, also keep in mind, I just want the shape. I don't want anything else in this layer. So I'm going to first of all make sure it's visible. And the second thing I'm also going to do is delete all of these effects that are on here. And I'm going to change its blending mode back to normal. So we have a black circle once again. Now I'm going to change its fill color to white just so that we can see it and also increase its opacity all the way. First, we're going to right click and add in a new solid layer. I need to add in my gradient ramp effect. And then I'm going to top that up with the colorama effect. I'm essentially just going to go down to my output cycle. I've got a bunch of these colors and I'm just going to delete a bunch until we have maybe like 4 colors. And I'm going to spread these out evenly just like so. For the first color, I'm going to double click and I'm just going to use a really bright light blue. For my second color, I'm going to double click and use a darker blue. For my third color, I'm definitely going to be using a purple. And for my last color, I'm probably going to be using a really, really dark blue. Or actually, I might just substitute this for another really, really light blue. This is already looking pretty good, but there's a few things we need to change. One big thing I need these edges to be dark black. So what I'm going to do is select my first color up here, double click on this and make it really dark. Just like that. That's going to make my edge dark. And if I move this back a little bit, it's going to make both of my edges dark, which is exactly what I want. Now I'm going to move this blue color back here, the light blue so that it's in the middle of the screen and the purple so that it's in the bottom of the screen, just like that. And this is going to give us a nice and simple gradient, just like so. So I'm actually just going to put my dark value right here. I'm going to add another piece that's also going to be black. And I'm going to extend it so that it takes up the upper half of the screen. And this thing can take up the bottom half of the screen, just like so. And now we can extend these back here so that we could get a better gradient. This is looking pretty good. We can always add in more layers right in the middle with bright values. And I'm just going to add another one over here with a really, really bright value. So once we have a kind of color just like this, now we could begin the entire animation. So the big thing we're going to be doing is we're going to be keyframing the start of my ramp and the end of my ramp. Let's click on you, move both of these keyframes to the back here. So I'm going to move my bottom value over to here and my top value over to here, just like so. Then we're going to move around 2 seconds in, and we're going to move my top value to the top right, my bottom value to the top right. What I'm essentially going to do is I can extend the end of the ramp so that one of these starts earlier than another, and this way we end up with a much bigger line, just like that. First, we're going to add a few more things. The big thing I'm going to be adding in is the turbulent displace effect. So I'm just going to increase the amount until we have a pretty stiff warp. I'm going to play around with the size until we have a pretty complex image. Also increase the complexity if you guys want a very rough effect. I think a complexity of 2 might be really good. Once again, guys, if you do think the line is too short, you can always extend or decrease one of these keyframes here, and you will get a longer line. Now, another thing that we also want to do is we want to add in just a blur to kind of merge everything together. So I'm going to be adding in a Gaussian blur and increasing the blur amount just to kind of merge these together. Maybe something like 5 is going to be enough. All right, finally, let's go ahead and place this solid under our shape layer. And let's go ahead and track matte it to the shape layer that we've got. Now, this is going to appear just as a quick flyby, just like so, which looks pretty cool. But how do we make this effect look a lot nicer? One of the main ways we could do this is we can actually decrease this thing's size so that we can actually see more of the gradient flying by. And the second thing that we're also going to do to really bring this effect to life is we're going to be layering on the CC lens effect. Now, the CC lens effect, if we play around with the size, is actually going to create a lens, and I want to decrease this just enough until it's just around the edges of our circle. And if I play around with the convergence, you guys can see it's going to essentially blend those edges so that as this animation comes in, it essentially looks like a cool warped effect. Now, there's a few things I really don't like about this is the fact that there's a lot of colors, to be honest. There's a lot of purple, there's a lot of blue, there's just a lot of mix of colors. I ended up going with these colors because I think that gives us the best kind of result for this cool animation. Now, one more thing that we can also do to blend this thing even better is this final touch of detail, which is going to be selecting our shape layer and right clicking and adding in an inner glow. Now, for my inner glow, I'm setting my blending mode to normal, setting the opacity to 100% and changing the color to a black. And what I'm essentially going to try to do is just draw out this super light shadow around the edges that is going to be relatively harsh, but not too harsh, just to the point where we can kind of hide those edges. And if we could do this, this is going to give us a very clean result. The final touch of detail is going to be a cool ring right around the edge that's really going to help us highlight this special circle. And now to do this, all that we have to do is select our shape layer and actually duplicate it. Now we're going to go ahead and make this visible so that we can see it. The main difference I'm going to do with this one is I'm actually changing the fill color to a black, changing its blending mode back to normal, and changing the inner glow to a white, which means I essentially just inverted the entire operation inside out. Now we're just going to go ahead and select the same black solid with our cool colors and duplicate it and bring it up top over here so we can see it. Let's make sure it's not track matted, and also let's make sure we delete that CC lens effect. Now we're going to go ahead and scale it back to its original size. So I'm going to right click and reset the scale. The main difference I'm going to do is I'm going to add in the CC blobalize effect to my colors, and I'm going to go to blob layer and simply change the source to the original shape layer which we used, which is going to be shape layer 3. It's that circle that we used at the bottom. And the main difference is I'm going to select it, take the drag matte parent tool and parent the track matte to the top shape layer with the inner glow, which is going to mean it's only going to appear around the edges. Another cool effect you guys could do is also go down to your track matte and simply click on this. It's going to create this very, very clean highlight right around the edge of the circle as this whole thing comes to life, which I think looks absolutely amazing. So this being said, I am going to use this effect, and then I'm going to go down to my blobbiness and I'm just going to play around with these values so that we have a shorter edge, just like that. And there we go, guys. You end up with this very clean effect that reveals your circle. Now we can just go ahead and right click, add in an adjustment layer, add the deep glow effect to it. I'm going to cut this adjustment layer to be just the right size, and I'm going to pre-compose it with this entire animation over here. And finally change the pre-composition to a screen. And I do think my deep glow is too strong, so I'm going to go ahead and tone it down to a 0.2, which is a very light value with a big radius. Now once we get to this point here, there is a point where our circle is filled. And by the way, are you enjoying this tutorial so far? If you're finding this kind of stuff useful, you're going to absolutely love what we've been building out for the last year. With 100 plus courses on Premiere Pro and After Effects, 150 plus courses on the viral editing styles of 2025, and 50 plus courses on how to actually land clients and make money with your skills. If you're tired of learning through random YouTube tutorials and you want the actual blueprint to becoming a high-level editor, then this is what you need. You can check out Ultimate Editors down in the link below. And if you're on the fence, there's even a full breakdown video to help you make a better decision. This is the perfect opportunity to reveal the actual circle which we are going to be using. And to do this, I'm simply going to go in here, copy my current shape layer and paste it outside. This is the shape layer that I am going to use at the end. This is the actual circle. And the main difference is I'm going to remove all these effects from it. So I'm basically deleting the inner glow, and I'm going to add a radial gradient fill. And I'm simply going to set one of my corners in the top right over here. And I'm simply just going to be using a blue and white colorway. So I'm going to click on this, make my first color a very, very light blue, and my second color a brightish blue. That's going to create this kind of circle. And all I got to do is just make sure that I move this point to the edge and this point over to here, which is going to create this cool shade. And I'm also going to right click and actually add back in my inner glow. But this time I'm not going to be using a black color. I'm instead going to be using a light white color with a big opacity and a very high range so that it's barely noticeable and a relatively bigger size. And I'm just going to also make its color a light blue instead. And there we go, guys. This is going to be the final ball which I'm going to be using to animate. And if I make sure that we reveal this right as this animation is at its peak, I'm going to place it under our pre-composition and resize it so that it is the exact size of this inner ball over here. This is essentially just going to help us blend this into the whole animation. Just like this. There we go. We can also add a quick fade in animation at the beginning by selecting it, clicking on T, keyframe the current opacity, move back and start it at 0%. This basically completes this first scene which reveals our ball animation. However, we can make it a lot more dynamic by playing around with the background as this whole animation happens. So what I mean by this is as we're going through this animation, there's a lot happening with the background. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm actually going to select my background, select my 4-color gradient, and move this point over to where my light sweep is, right up here. Move this point instead back to here. And I'm going to move this point over to the bottom here and this point up to the top. So this means our dark values are in the top right and bottom left, and our light values are in the top left and bottom right. I'm also going to be keyframing the position of these points. Then we're going to be moving forward as this light sweep comes across and moving these points accordingly so that the background actually interacts with the light sweep. So let's go ahead and see. This is the first keyframe here. I'm going to make sure that these light sweep actually start at the bottom over here. All right. And now our background just kind of interacts like this with our light sweep, which is a cool animation, but it's definitely too harsh. So I'm going to go ahead and slow this whole thing down. And I also wanted to interact with this blue gradient that comes in. And so what I'm essentially going to do is, since point 1 and point 4 are both not animating, I'm going to move point 1 back to the top right and point 4 back to the bottom right like this. And this is where I'm going to keyframe the color of all these different points and change them. So I'm going to move forward to where the blue takes over, and I'm simply just going to add a little blue hue to everything. This color over here is actually going to be really light gray blue. And these top colors over here, they're actually going to change back into a dark black color, which is going to help us kind of balance out this background. And what essentially happens is this whole thing animates together. And then right at the end, I'm finally just going to go all the way to the end here and move one of these points back down to the bottom, which is going to be color 3, and change its color to something like a dark blue, which is really going to help blend this background together. There we go, guys. This completes this first animation and our circle is finally revealed. Now you can finally use this scene to transition into the next scene, which is going to be this whole planet sequence with a bunch of things happening on the screen. So in order to do this, I want to rotate my shape layer, which means I'm going to select my shape layer and add in my transform effect on top of it. Now, if I basically rotate this, you can see the colors on it rotate, and I'm simply going to keyframe the current rotation over here as it is, and my transition is going to be around the 4-second mark. This is where we're going to add not 1, not 2, but 3 whole rotations. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make sure it starts slow and then ends fast. I'm just going to keyframe the position of the rotation instead. Then I'm going to move forward and I'm going to move the actual transform position to the right, just like so. And I'm also going to make sure it starts very slow and ends really, really fast. Now, right at the end here, what's essentially going to happen is we're going to cut up both of these layers and cut this first scene. We're also going to cut our background because we are now officially done with the first part of this animation. Now, moving into the second part of this animation, we're going to go ahead and take our new background and remove all of these keyframes so that we're starting completely from scratch. And we're going to create a bright background to start with. So first, we're going to use our color 1 to create a light gray blue, and we're going to use color 3 to make a light blue. Color 2 is going to be a light blue as well, and color 4 is going to be a bit of a darker blue. There we go. And we'll just extend the blend just a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm basically going to reuse the same shape layer. I'm going to duplicate it and move it over to this side. And in my new ball over here, I'm basically just going to remove my fade in animation real quick. I've basically just duplicated the same thing with the transform layer. Instead, I'm going to have it start in this position and end in the original position of the ball without the rotation properties. I'm actually going to be deleting the rotation properties and just have it snap back to the middle. And we're also just going to make sure that it snaps quick and then slows down. And what this looks like is like this. Now we're going to extend this, and to make this ball now simulate the sun, we needed to number one, change colors, and number two, become a lot brighter. And a simple way to do this is to basically just go ahead and search up for the deep glow effect and add it in. Let's first of all set the exposure to 0, keyframe it at 0 over here in the beginning. And I'm just going to make sure this keyframe starts somewhere around here, and right around the 7 seconds mark or something like this. I'm just going to go ahead and increase this up until it is really bright, something like 1.5. And then what I'm going to do is I'm also going to change the colors of this shape. To do this, I'm going to go into my shape layer, go down to contents, go down to ellipse, and go down to gradient fill. I'm just going to keyframe the colors over here, move slightly forward, and change these colors so that they are both a pure white. Now once this thing becomes our sun, then we can go ahead and move forward with the animation. We're going to click on S, keyframe our current scale. Let's move this keyframe back to here, and somewhere around this point here, I'm basically just going to scale this thing down up until it is relatively small, something like this. We're also just going to make sure this thing starts slow, but we also need this thing to end slow too. So I'm just going to make sure that the peak is somewhere right in the middle. Keep in mind, the peak of this animation is somewhere around this moment here. This is where we want our solar circles to start coming in. So I'm going to right click and add in another new shape layer. Now in this shape layer, I'm essentially just going to use my ellipse tool, hold down shift, and I'm going to draw out a perfect ellipse once again. This time I'm going to click on fill and remove the fill and just add a very light stroke of maybe 2. Now once we have our stroke, I'm also going to make sure to align this to the center, which should perfectly align with our circle in the middle. And I'm going to change its scale so that we have the first circle be up here. And I'm going to click on T so that its opacity is little and just bring it down to something like 40%, which even 40% is still pretty harsh. So I might actually bring it down to 35%. Now this is looking good, but I'm just going to go ahead and extend it, make it a bit bigger. And just to add one extra layer of detail, we're basically just going to add our fill color one more time. Make sure that the fill color is white. And this time we're simply going to go into here, go into our contents, into the fill color, and simply change the fill opacity so that it is so incredibly light. We barely want this thing to affect the background. Change it down to something like 10%. All right, the final thing we're going to be doing is simply having this thing animate in. So once again, our scale animation starts here and ends here, which means this thing's scale animation is also going to start here and end at this point right over here. Now its end value is going to be its current size, whereas its beginning value is going to be bigger than the screen. That's kind of why this whole animation looks cool. We're going to select it and just make sure that this thing is also perfectly timed with how this animation is, which means it's going to start slow and end very slow and have a peak right in the middle. And there we go, guys. This basically scales down our sun and adds that solar ring. We're also going to duplicate this and delay it a little bit. So we now have 2 rings which are going to come down, and we're not going to have that second one end in the same scale. We're going to have the second one end way larger, somewhere around this range, just like that. And we're also going to take that second ring and change its stroke to 1. Now once this happens, we also want a bunch of these planets to kind of start popping in and appearing on the screen. So the main way we got to do this is, first of all, we got to create the planets. And to create the planets, it's very easy. We got to right click, add in a new shape layer. Now this shape layer specifically is just going to behave as a planet. So we're going to use the ellipse tool, hold down shift and draw out a circle. We're also going to align it with the center as usual and make sure the anchor point is also at the center. Now we're going to click on fill, change this to radial gradient. And for my first planet, I'm actually just going to be using slightly darker blue, and over here something that is slightly lighter, something just like that. Now we just got to go ahead and select our gradient fill, and you guys will see the nodes once again. Once again, we got to put the bright point in the top right and the darker point in the bottom left. I do think there's a few things I want to change. I think the dark value is too dark, so I'm going to go ahead and tone it up a little bit. And the light value is too dark, so I'm going to go ahead and tone it up a little bit. Also, make sure there's no stroke on this thing. Once that's good, we're also going to add in our inner glow. Inside of our inner glow, we're going to increase the opacity and change the color to a white, and simply increase the size until we can clearly see it, and increase the range until we can't clearly see the edges. And this should act as a pretty cool planet. And to create my pop-up animation, I'm simply going to click on S, keyframe my current scale, move it forward around 1 second, and simply start it at 0%. Then I'm just going to bring this into the speed graph and just make sure it starts fast and then slows down. I also want to create this as a bounce animation just because it's going to look a lot better in this setup. I'm going to select these and go back into our speed graph. We're going to right click, make sure we're using our value graph, not this peak graph. We're going to select these and we're just going to go ahead and click on F9 so we can see these values. We're going to start it fast and make sure that the bounce is something like this. But then right around here, I'm just simply going to add another keyframe and move it up to the top like so. And I'm simply just going to make sure that this thing reaches fast around here and then slows back down and smoothly transitions out of this animation right at this point over here. And if we play around with this just a little bit more, we should end up with a very clean bounce animation. Just like so. Now the right time to have this animation happen is not when the animation ends over here. It's actually just before it. So I'm going to move back a few frames and have this whole animation start right over here. You guys can see it just feels a lot more natural this way. And now the big thing that I can actually do is add in a transform effect if I want to change the scale, which I definitely want to. I'm going to change the scale to something like this. And if I click on P on this and move its position around, you guys can see I can actually just move this animation to basically wherever I need. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead and fill this entire animation with a bunch of these planets. So the first thing I'm going to do is select this and duplicate it 15 times. So here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we're going to select all of these and duplicate them once and twice. This is going to give us 15 different layers. Now with these 15 different layers, I'm going to play around with the sizing. For this first one, I'm just going to scale it down a little bit more. I'm going to go ahead and select all of them and make them invisible so I could select which one I want to work with. I'm going to go with the first one and make it visible. I'm going to make it a little bit smaller and then I'm going to go ahead and move its position so that it is in the top right of my scene over here. So I'm just going to go ahead and move it right over to here and put it somewhere right next to our solar circle. And there we go. This is going to be our first planet. I'm also going to take it and change its color a little bit. I'm going to select its fill, select the first color, make it brighter, and the second color and just make it a lot whiter. I just want this one to be a lot brighter. Second thing I'm also going to be doing, now I'm also just going to make the second layer visible. This one, I'm actually just going to scale it down a little bit less than this first planet. And I'm going to use the position to move it and place it in the bottom right over here. And for this one, we're going to go with a greenish blue. So it's got to be like a teal color that ends with a darkish green. For my third one, let's go ahead and make it visible. Let's go ahead and scale it down a little bit more. I'm going to leave this one as a blue and I'm going to put it in the top right over here. For the one on top of it, I'm also going to make this one visible. I'm going to leave this one as a blue as well. Scale it down, click on P. And then I'm just going to go ahead and place it over here in the bottom right. With ones like these, I do want to make them a bit harsher just so that they are more visible. So I'm going to make the blue darker and the edges darker too. All right, now I'm going to make the layer on top of that one visible again. And for this one, we're going to change it to a very light planet. And we're going to leave it at this size. And we're just going to go ahead and place it at the bottom over here. Now for this next one, we're going to go ahead and make it visible. This one, we're actually just going to change to an orange color. So I'm going to start playing around with these colors. I'm going to change the first color to an orange and second color to an orange. Just make sure that the first color is a lot lighter and the second color is also a lot lighter. We don't want any harsh colors here. And with this one, we're just going to go ahead and place it out on the left side over here. And we also are going to scale this thing in just a bit more. For the next planet, I'm also making sure this one is an orange too. We're making this one a similar size and we're also moving it to the right side over here. For the third one, I'm also going to be making this one an orange, but with this one, I'm actually going to make it really big and I'm going to place the edge of it over here in the top right. And I like having these planets on the edges, so I'm actually just going to make a few more. I'm going to take this blue one. We're going to change its color to a teal, so something like a bright teal to a darkish blue. And for this one, we're also going to be increasing its size, and I'm going to be moving it back to the bottom right over here. For the one above it, I'm going to be just using a dark blue combo, and I'm also scaling this one pretty big and moving it to the bottom right over here. For this next one, I'm going to make it something like a lightish blue, and I am also going to make it pretty big, and I'm going to put it in the top right over here. For these next few, I'm actually just going to make them really small, and I'm just going to go ahead and scatter them throughout. And there we go, guys. We're not going to need the rest of these shape layers. We should now have a bunch of these planets that all pop in. Now, this being said, if we watch this back as an animation, this all looks really good. However, you guys already know what would make this more realistic from the visual side of things is actually blurring out the things which are too close to the camera and blurring in the things which are at the right time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in the Gaussian blur effect to one of these. I'm going to add it into one of these planets which are around the edges, and I'm simply going to increase the blur. Now when I do this, you guys are going to notice the planet actually blurs out. Make sure to uncheck repeat edge pixels, and I'm going to just make sure to blur this out up to something around 40, which is really just going to make sure it is definitely blurred out, which is just just gonna make sure that this gives us this feeling of depth. Now, I'm gonna go ahead and copy this Gaussian blur. I'm gonna also add this to the planet up over here, and I'm not gonna add it to this planet here. I'm probably going to add it to this planet over here. For these two, I'm just gonna leave them as they are. I'm gonna add it to this planet back here, but I'm also just going to make it super light, like 15. Now I'm gonna copy this Gaussian blur. I'm gonna add it to this planet here as well. And I'm also going to add it to this planet here, but I'm going to make it super light, like just 5. So I'm just going to go down to here and just make sure they all start a few frames after each other. And then we could just kind of move back to just 1 frame here. And these don't all have to start after each other. We can also just kind of start these at random like so. And now once this zoom out and all these planets pop in, that's pretty much it for this specific scene. We can finally transition into our next scene. So what we're actually going to need to do is we're going to need to zoom back in to the shape layer over here. We're just going to go ahead and right click and add in a new null object. We're also going to add in the transform effect. Now, if we change anything about this, nothing is going to be affected unless we open up the null object, open up the transform effect, and then simply parent any of these shape layers to something like this null object. And then we play around with the scale, then it is going to be affected by it. So now what we're going to do is we're going to select everything, including the solar rays, except that sun in the background. And we're just going to parent all of them to this null object. And now when we change the scale of this, you can see everything zooms past our sun. And we're going to leave all of this stuff as it is, but we're going to keyframe the current scale. And right after everything pops in, to make this smooth, we're going to start the scale animation here. And for around 1 whole second, we're just going to zoom in all the way until all of this stuff is off the screen, which is right around here. When we do this, we also need to make sure that this thing inside of our speed graph is going to start very, very slow and end fast as well. Now, this being said, once everything is off screen, we could just select all of these layers and then just cut them off. And obviously, as the null object is zooming in, we also want to select our shape layer with the sun, keyframe its current scale, and then end it at a much bigger scale. We're going to want this specific shape layer to end at around this size, something like so. And for this specific animation, we're just going to go ahead and bring it into our graph and make sure it starts very slow and ends slow as well. So we're going to click on U so that we can see those gradient colors again. We're just going to go ahead and copy that end color over to here. So it starts with the end color. Then we're going to move to the end. We're going to copy this and we're going to paste our original color back again. So right around here for the exposure, I'm adding a keyframe, and then I'm going to move over to the end of the animation and just tone down the exposure to something like 0. All right, you're 20 minutes into this editing tutorial. You're enjoying learning how to create this animation. This tells me 2 things. That number 1, you're an editor who wants to learn how to create more viral animations like this one. And number 2, you're an editor that most likely wants to make $1,000 or more with video editing. If this is you, here's the thing. Trying to learn to do this on YouTube is very difficult. You never know what the next step is. You want to work hard, but you don't know what to work hard on. It's like trying to get fit by watching random YouTube videos. Instead, the real progress comes from hiring a personal trainer who's going to create a custom plan for you to achieve your goal and keep you accountable to that plan. Ultimate Editors is the complete plan for video editors that will teach you how to become a high-level editor, how to create these complex animations, and how to use these skills to start landing clients that will pay you $1,000 plus every single month. But how can we actually guarantee this? Well, when you have over 100 courses that teach you everything on Premiere Pro and After Effects, and over 150 courses that teach you how to edit in the Josh Leon style, Devin Jatho style, Iman Gaji style, my editing style, and many more, and over 50 courses that teach you how to build out your brand, do proper outreach, and close clients, and 3 weekly calls with me to make sure that you're consistently working hard, and new courses every single month to make sure that you are always ahead of the editing market, then it's obvious that by joining the Ultimate Editors community, we are confident we can make you an amazing video editor and get you your first $1,000 per month editing job. As a matter of fact, we've done this time and time again to a point where we actually expect this. We know that if you join Ultimate Editors, you will master video editing, you will learn the viral editing styles, and you will make $1,000 per month with video editing. If this sounds interesting to you, you can get access to the Ultimate Editors plan, the 300 plus video editing courses that I'm talking about, all packaged in one big package for video editors like you, and it's all going to be linked down below. You can get access to Ultimate Editors in the first link down in the description. Do yourself a favor, guys. We never know when we're going to need to increase the prices again, so make sure you join Ultimate Editors today. And with all this being said, let's dive right back into the video. We're going to right click and add in a text layer. I'm going to write out complete total rates. of success. And then I'm going to select all of them, and I'm going to make sure I'm using the SFUI display font. And I'm also going to use a relatively thicker font. I'm not going to use a very light one, so I'm probably going to go with semi-bold. Let's make sure that the fill is white. To create our text animation, we're going to be heading over down to here. We're going to be clicking on the plus icon next to the animate function, and we're going to be clicking on the position factor. And we simply want it to pop in from the bottom, so I'm going to move it down to the bottom over here. Now, if we open up our range selector, this is where we can begin the animation. So we're going to keyframe the current start value, move around a second in, and just increase it all the way up. Now, with this done, we're going to go ahead and open up the advanced section. And instead of setting the units to percentage, we're going to change it to index. Then we're going to change it based off of characters to based off of words. Now we could just decrease the start function up until we have just enough start for the words to pop up. Now, the other thing I also want to do is I want to go down to shape and change it to ramp up. So at the beginning, we're just going to change the end to 0. And at the end, we're going to increase the start value up until everything is completely straight. Now, this is going to make our animation very fast, which is not something we want. So we're going to select it, take it into the speed graph, and make sure it starts slow and ends fast. It's finally time to add in another property. We're going to be adding in the opacity property and dragging it down to 0%. Then we're also going to go down again, click on add yet another property, and this time we're going to add the blur property and increase the blur at the beginning to something significant. Probably going to go with 20. I'm going to select it, go to effects and presets, and I'm going to add in the gradient ramp effect. Now for the gradient ramp, I'm simply going to set the start of the ramp on top of the text and the end of the ramp right at the bottom of the text. The main thing I'm doing is I'm going to set the start color to a complete white. I'm going to set the end color to something like a light gray. All right, this will be evident in a moment. We're going to go ahead and right click and add a layer style. We're going to add in the inner glow, change the color to a pure white, and maybe even increase the size just a tiny little bit. We'll also increase the range a little bit so it's less noticeable. And there we go. We end up with this very clean text. Now, once we have the whole text animation, I think we got to play around with one more thing, which is going to be drop shadows. So for drop shadows, what I'm basically going to do is duplicate this so we have the same animation twice. Then I'm going to select the base layer, delete the gradient ramp, and also on the base layer, I'm also going to be deleting the inner glow. So we basically just have raw text at the bottom just with the animation. Head over to properties and change the fill to black. And then I'm going to go to effects and presets, click on CC radial fast blur and add it in, which is going to create a casted shadow. Then we're going to add the center to the top left, which is going to create this cool casted shadow. I'm going to play around with this until we have a pretty cool angle, which should be something like that. And then lastly, I'm going to play around with the amount until we have a slight casted shadow. And then we're just going to tone down the opacity up until we can barely see it, which I think is good at 20%. We're going to right click and add in a new shape layer. And this time around, we're going to be drawing out a simple ellipse right in the middle. Now for this thing's color, I'm actually going to be using a orange theme. And I'm also going to be doing the same thing where I go to my gradient fill and I simply add it to the top corner in the top right. And we're also going to right click and add in an inner glow on here as well. Inside of the inner glow, we're going to do the usual, increase the opacity, change it to a white color and increase the size up until we can see it, and then maybe bump up the range so it's a bit softer. For this thing's inner glow, I might actually go with a light orange just to bring it to life, but I think a pure white actually looks best. The first thing we want to do is create our pop-in animation. So let's go ahead and move the position up to the top over here, and we're just going to have a scale in animation. I'm going to click on S. I'm going to go ahead and move over to the 12-second mark, and I'm going to have it end at something like 70. Let's keyframe it at 70, move back 1 second and start it at 0. Now let's go ahead and select this animation and just make sure it starts fast and then slows down. And I'm actually going to head over to our value graph, head over right till here and create the pop-up animation by adding one extra keyframe, moving this thing up here, and I'm going to make this super cartoony. One thing I am also going to be doing is adding some text to this specific shape layer. I'm going to be adding in a text layer over here, and I'm going to be writing out a number on it. That number is going to be 25%. And then on the 25%, I'm also going to be adding the exact same gradient ramp that I added on the bottom text. Make sure to realign these points so that you have them on the 25. And I'm also going to be adding in the same inner glow, just like that. And for this specific text, 25, I'm just going to be placing this inside of my ball here and scaling it down just so that it is. Make sure the anchor point's at the center, by the way, since this thing is going to be affected by the scale animation. Let's just make sure it's at the center of the ball over here. And once we're sure that it is, then we've pretty much completed it. All we got to do is parent it to the shape layer under it. And now this whole thing is going to animate with our ball just like so. So I'm going to go ahead and right click and I'm going to add in a null object. With the null object, I'm going to make sure that my anchor point's in the middle of this big circle. The main reason is if I can now click on R and I can parent this shape layer to the null object, and I create a rotation. Since the anchor point is right in the middle of this circle, it's going to make sure that this thing only rotates based on the center of the circle. That's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to keyframe the current rotation as soon as it creates a pop-up, and this thing is only going to rotate up to 25%, which is right around here. And I'm also just going to make sure that this whole animation starts very slow and ends very fast. So from here to create the entire stroke animation, this is where things are going to get really nice. So we're just going to go ahead and duplicate it and bring it up to the top. But this time we're just going to cut it right here. Now what we're going to be doing is we're going to be deleting the deep glow and deleting the transform effect off of it. I'm also changing the circle's blending mode to normal. There's a few things I'm going to need to do with this circle. Number one, I'm going to go ahead and add in a solid color. And number two, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of the inner glow. I'm going to go ahead and increase its size up until it just barely covers that circle that we created. I'm going to go ahead and put it under these layers so I can see it. And as you guys can see, it goes over the edge by a little bit, which is not what we want. So let's just go ahead and tone this down to 196. Let's see if 197 hits it better. 197 seems to be the perfect value for this case. Now, the final thing that we have to do is put this entire layer under our main circle. I'm first going to go ahead and remove this fill because I'm obviously not going to use it. And I'm going to add in a solid stroke. And as I start increasing it, you guys will notice this stroke is filling in from the center. And all I could basically do is go back to this point where we can see the 25 and simply change the scale of this shape layer so that the stroke is at the perfect center of this circle. And now it's just all about playing around with values up until we get the perfect stroke. So I'm going to go ahead and increase the stroke a little bit. As you guys can see, it's going to fill in, and I want it to be just perfect. And this seems to be it. So a stroke of 63 seems to be perfect, and it seems to cover the ball on both edges. And that's basically all that I want. Now, when I do this, I can basically open this shape layer, click on add the trim paths function, and I can use my trim paths function to essentially draw out where the stroke is going to be. I'm going to go back to the beginning, and I'm going to set the start to 0% and the end to 0%. I'm also going to keyframe the end right over here, and I'm going to go to where the total rotation of the 25% is done, which is right around here, and I'm going to increase the percentage of the end up until we hit the 25%. Now, we are going to be changing this, so don't worry too much about it. But one thing you guys will notice is the edges are obviously not looking good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my content. Let's open up ellipse 1, open up the stroke, and change the line cap to round cap. And all that's left to do is basically just time it right. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the fastest point in this animation, which seems to be right here. And I'm going to go ahead and open it up, and I'm going to align the peaks here. So I'm going to go ahead and speed this up, and I'm going to speed this up until it is at the fastest point here. And all I want to do is I just want to make sure that these are both going at the same exact speed. Now you guys can see how this ball is essentially drawing out our stroke. And doesn't that look absolutely cool? Now the thing is, I don't want it to be just a white stroke, so let's go ahead and work on this. The main thing that we're going to be doing is we're going to be adding in a 4-color gradient on this. And we're going to be coloring it with an orange. We're going to be placing 0.1 here, 0.2 here, 0.3 here, and 0.4 here. We're essentially going to make 0.1 this orange and make all of them the same exact orange. Now all that we have to do is make the first orange the right color. So we're just going to make this one like a light orange, and then we'll make the second one slightly lighter. We'll make the third one slightly lighter. I'll make the last one a very light value. And finally, we're also going to right click and add layer styles and add an inner glow on this. Inside the inner glow, we're going to be using a bright orange or a bright white. And let's just make sure that the sizing and the range of this is actually visible and it's not too light. Now, as this whole stroke is happening, I also do want to have a stroke in the background that fills in the gap. And what I mean by this is I'm going to actually select this shape layer, duplicate it, click on U so I can see my keyframes, go to my end keyframe, and on my duplicate, I'm going to increase the end all the way to 100%. And I'm simply going to slow it down a lot more. And the only main difference I'm going to do is I'm going to place these colors at different positions for this stroke, and I'm going to change it to way darker colors. So I'm going to be using a grayish kind of blue. Now, one thing you do notice is the inner glow is very dominant on this specific layer. So I'm going to go down to my inner glow, and I'm probably actually going to make this way lighter, but probably leave it something like this. And this being said, all I have to do is place this shape layer under our main stroke layer. So right under this thing. I also want other shape layers to fill in our background. And so the main way that we're going to do this is we're going to right click, add in a new shape layer on top of everything. We're going to use the ellipse tool to essentially hold down shift and draw out a circle that's pretty big. I'm going to make sure it's aligned with the center, which is where our circle is. And I'm simply going to change the fill type to a straight color without a stroke. And all that we're going to do is we're going to place this behind our circle here. And we're just simply going to have the these kind of zoom in like that just to kind of fill in the background. And so the main colors we're going to be using for these are just going to be the same as the background, but slightly different shades. So what I'm thinking is we're going to use the eyedropper tool to find the same color as the backgrounds, but then we're just going to select them and maybe just go slightly lighter on some of them. And we're also going to right click and add in the layer styles and inner glow. Let's once again make sure it's 100% visible and increase the size until we can clearly see it. It's also going to fill in the background, so let's go ahead and make sure it's white and drop its opacity until it's barely visible. And the animation that we're going to go with for this is keyframe the current scale, move back and start it at 0. That's simply it. And just make sure it starts fast and then slows down. No complex animations in this one. And we're also going to duplicate this and have a layer on top that essentially zooms in all the way to the edges of the screen. Now this layer is going to have a way less inner glow, so something around 20%. And we're going to just play around with the colors until we have the same original colors that we went with. So we're going to go light blue on this one. We might actually completely remove the inner glow because I think that actually looks nice. Finally, let's go ahead and make sure this thing is under our first circle. So the first circle pops in and then that second one just kind of fills in the gap just like so. I do think it is a bit too harsh, so we can always play around with opacity. We can go with 50% for this one. I'm actually going to take this big circle and there's a few things I don't like. It's just the colors, honestly. So I'm going to use the eyedropper tool to get the same colors as these edges, which are on our mini circle, and then just change them a little bit. That's it. I'm just going to make them slightly darker. And if you guys want to take this one step further, which I really do want to, I would just want to add in a bit more to this background because I think it could, handle a few more layers. We're going to duplicate this big circle layer over here that we already have an animation on. And we're just going to go ahead and delete this fill. So we have basically nothing on it. And we're going to delete the color gradient. We're just going to add in a simple colored stroke and a very light one, maybe 2 pixels. And for this main layer, I'm going to make sure it scales down to something like around here. And I'm just going to go ahead and tone down its opacity up until it's not that visible. We're actually just going to make sure it scales up until here. I'm going to duplicate it as well, move it forward and make sure it scales all the way up until here. Now, since this whole animation ends at 20 seconds, I'm going to select it, click on Ctrl+Shift+D and cut it right off. And if you guys know one thing about animating, it's that when the end is reached, it's not actually the end. It's time for post-production, which is the most important step in the entire animation. So the first main thing we're going to be doing for post-production to make this a 10 out of 10 animation is honestly just selecting all of the layers, clicking on toggle switches and modes and enabling motion blur for every single layer. This is going to make a huge difference in the animation. The second layer of post-production I'm also going to be adding is just some subtle text here and there just to bring some life to the animation, because I think that would look insanely good in this. So for this first section here, I'm going to start drawing out this kind of story. So I'm going to write out the words "sometimes you see it" with 3 dots. We're just going to take this text, scale it down. We're just going to go ahead and stylize this text real quick. I'm going to be doing the same exact style that I always go with. We're going to be adding in a gradient ramp. Let's make sure the start is right above the text and the end is right below it. We're just going to make sure that the start color is a bright, say nice and grayish white, and then the end color is going to be a slight gray. And I'm also just going to make sure that the start is a bit closer, just like this, so that that gray can kind of stand out a bit more. This style looks awesome, to be honest. And then all I'm going to be doing that's different is adding in a drop shadow onto this text, which is barely going to be noticeable, but when we basically play around with the softness, we should get something that is nice and subtle. And finally add in a deep glow to finish it off. Now the deep glow has to be super light, just at a 0.1. So to animate this text, we're just going to go ahead and open up our text, click on the animate tool, and we're going to recreate the same blur animation. As a matter of fact, we can literally go to our blur animation, open up your text, click on animator 1 and just click on Ctrl+C, go up here, click on Ctrl+V. Then you just got to bring these keyframes all the way back here. All I'm going to do now is I'm just going to go ahead and move this to the left, scale it down a little bit and move it to the top. Let's just make sure that it is big enough to be visible. Keep in mind, guys, when you do this, you're also going to need to move your gradient ramp. I'm going to make sure my gradient ramp's up here and just the dark value is on the right side based off of the circle. Before we duplicate this layer, I also want to add an animation out. So we're just going to add a keyframe for the start, move forward and decrease it up until we can no longer see the text. And for this animation, just make sure it starts slow and then ends fast. Now we're going to duplicate this layer and we're just going to put one over here. We're going to double click and we're going to write out the words "sometimes you don't" with 3 dots as well. This time I'm taking my text and placing it in the bottom right over here. And once again, make sure you put the start of the ramp, the end of the ramp accordingly. And we're also going to make sure that when the whole scene cut happens, which is right at this frame, we're going to cut our text out. And now that the text is done, I'm going to go on to adding a few more layers and finish finishing off the post-production. So the first layer I'm also going to be adding is just some subtle zoom ins here and there to bring more life to this whole animation. To do this, I'm just going to add in an adjustment layer and add the transform effect to it. I just want to emphasize this transition right here. And to do this, I was thinking perhaps I can add a keyframe right over here for the scale, maybe zoom in and maybe just have a zoom in right around here at 110 and then have it bounce back to 100. Over here. I think this would look pretty cool. Let's go ahead and make sure it starts slow, peaks in the middle and ends slow. And maybe over here, I'll just keyframe the scale and have a zoom in happen from this point all the way till the end at 110, which I just think is a subtle effect that can add a bit more life to this whole animation. Add in a new solid layer, make sure it's black, and we're going to use the ellipse tool to draw out this kind of ellipse right on the screen. Then all we're doing is we're going to invert it, click on F, and increase the mask feather up until it's barely noticeable. And then all you could do is basically tone down this thing's opacity to like 20%, which gives you your own customizable vignette. So if the more you increase the opacity, the more you're going to have a vignette around the edges. Another layer that we can also add is the Gaussian blur. So we're going to add in an adjustment layer, add in the Gaussian blur, and then bump this up to something like 20, draw out an ellipse right in the middle of the screen, click on invert, click on F, and increase this to around 150. And we're just going to tone down the opacity of this to 50% so it's not as intense. Now finally, we're going to add in one final adjustment layer and add in the noise effect on top of it. And we're going to set the noise to something like 6%. And with these kinds of motion graphics, noise really isn't good. And you don't really want to use it. So I'm just going to set it to 3% instead to keep it very light and very simple. And finally, we're going to cut all of these adjustment layers right here. And this being said, guys, you can finish this off with the black cinematic bars if you guys want. I always like to add it. It's a nice final touch. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and right click, add in this black solid. Then using my rectangle tool, I'm going to draw out a rectangle right in the middle like so. I'll show you guys how to use this in a moment. Then we're going to invert it, go down to your mask, and you could decrease the mask expansion to control how high your lines are. I think this much is going to be all that we're doing for this animation. This is how you do motion design, and this is how you do it properly, guys. If you felt like you've learned so much in this tutorial, I'm here to tell you guys, if you're a video editor and you want to master video editing and you want to make money with video editing, and if you're enjoying tutorials like these, you're going to love what's in Ultimate Editors. Promise you guys, I've specifically designed this for video editors like you who want to learn video editing. And if you're a video editor who wants to become the best possible editor and make money with video editing, I'm going to teach you everything about it inside of Ultimate Editors. Make sure you click the link down below. But this being said, guys, thanks a lot for watching this video. God bless each and every single one of you guys. If you love this video, go ahead and go down below. Let me know in the comments or leave a like if you found it useful. Maybe share it with your editor friends if you want them to also make the animation. And if you didn't like it, also please let me know. I always enjoy good criticism from you guys. I'll see you guys in the next video. You can always check out these two videos in the meantime, which are similar animations and high quality tutorials for you guys. See you guys in the next video. Take care and keep kicking good editing. See you guys next time.